everyone, and welcome back to the Information Bottleneck podcast. And today, this is only me and Aaron. We will talk about recent news and cool AI papers. Aaron,
It's good to see you again, Ravid. How are you?
good to see you. So, and by the way, so yesterday, iClear reviews were released. So, good luck, everyone, and remember that there is the next conference. Always there is the next conference. So if it will not get into the this time, it will be the next time. Don't worry.
Yeah, and I'll just say a few things. My understanding is that the average scores are about 1 point below what they were a year ago. On Paper Copilot, there's some preliminary evidence. I saw a lot of twos. Let me tell you, so many twos. But yeah, I'll also just say one other thing. I have learned that you can submit to a workshop that is still a good workshop, but not enough people submitted to. And you can get reviews that are like, hey, we should reject this paper. And then since there's nobody else, you get accepted anyway. I've seen that happen now too, which is even funnier. So there's always a path if you just find the
Yeah, and like we talked about it many times, right? Like the review process is so noisy these days, especially in the big conferences. There are so many papers, so many reviewers. Some of them don't have or don't want to read carefully the papers and to understand them. So I don't know. I feel that like you need, of course, to go over and to try to solve the problem that the reviewers create, but most of the time it's mostly noise and it doesn't worth the time.
Well, okay, I'll say that, but there are certain things that are predictable. And what I mean by this is that I'm fine with throwing myself under the bus here. I submitted a Hail Mary and I got the equivalent scores, which is the equivalent results of most Hail Mary throws for those who know football, which I suppose is very few of the readers. But Hail Mary is like an extremely risky, like basically throwing the ball across the field, kind of like hoping that they because you're praying, right, as you're waiting for the ball, right? Because I submitted a paper that wasn't really I would say complete, and I got scores reflecting that. So and I'm not even mad. I think they were like very fair analysis. So I guess what I would say is that parts of peer review are doing what they're supposed to, which is throwing out grossly negligent papers, or at least like on surface negligent or unsatisfactory papers. And in that sense, it's kind of like IQ, right? Where, you go listen to how Nassim Taleb talks about it. It's like IQ's really great at separating, very edges of the distribution, and is very poor for reflecting differences between even like 100 and 105 IQ, etc.
Yeah, I just want to say that like IQ is very like we know that IQ is quite biased to Western people, right? Rich people that have higher chances to get better results, right? And so it depends what you want to ask and how you want to evaluate it. But in general, I agree. I think that that papers that are really bad or not ready will get rejected, and papers that are really good will get in. But all the intermediate borderlines papers, it's mostly noise, at least in my experience.
Yeah, and there's a lot of studies that show that that's true, like with science. So
Yeah. Okay, so anyway, good luck everyone. And let's talk about Kimi K2 Thinking. Did you try it? What do you think about it?
yeah, so it's still mostly a DeepSeek moment. And the reason for this is always the more subtleties here. So it's true that the agentic benchmark performance, and on some but not all benchmarks, maybe about a third to half of them, they are basically equal or slightly state of the art on those benchmarks. The problem with this is that the quickest way to answer, is this equivalently as good in real world tasks, is to ask, what is the maximum context window of this model? And also, by extension, how many tokens was it trained on? And maybe even for how long. They sometimes even tell you that in the paper. And the problem is that their context window is 256,000, which is about a fifth or a tenth, I believe, depending on the model of the biggest American foundation models. So, and what we know is that the effective context windows is often a tenth of the theoretical. So by 30,000 tokens, most of these models are struggling. So basically, no, this isn't the destroy the kind of American models moment that the market was afraid of, but it's showing that more Chinese firms can, for probably even less money than DeepSeek did, get even closer to kind of bridging the gap. And if your use case is remarkably similar to any of those benchmarks, they are selectively better potentially. But on, like I said, I just think that long term, like, tasks that take 3, 4, 500,000 tokens, that's the stuff where there's the most economic value. So Americans are still ahead.
Yeah, I agree. I still think that like you have a lot of new things there, and like the thing that it's open source, right? So we know how they train it, we know how like what the tricks that they did, like the attention tricks that they used in order to make it. And I think this is the most important thing. Like I want to say that like don't really care, if like they have right like I don't know 28 thousand context window or 1 million or things like that. I think this is for the long term it's negligible because the important thing that like we know how to make a good reasoning models, and they showed us how to do it. They showed to the community, right? And this is the important thing. And when we when someone show it, we can actually take it, and the community, the open source community, can take it and use it and make these tricks better. So I still excited about it.
For sure. And this is just another bit of the Chinese firms kind of twisting the dagger in our hearts after really I would say that the beginning of the descent was probably, and yeah, with kind of more recent American open source model releases not being as what people expected them to be, I would say, in terms of quality. And oftentimes, for example, like OpenAI's GPT OSS having to release 120 billion parameter, where I think Kimi K2 Thinking, it's quite large, right? It's like trillion. Is it 1.8 trillion? Was it the full thing? I'm sorry, I have to check that again. I should know that offhand, but I remember it being, I think, the largest model ever released
Yeah.
publicly that's like good, right? I'm aware there's like Big Bloom or something, but
But but but this is something that like you can see here that they train it, they post train it with 4-bit precision, right? And this
oh,
is
yeah, that's a
yeah, and this is something that like they showed you that they are actually think about people that they want that people would use it, and they want that people will use it in their own real world task, right? So it's something that like we saw it before, right? It's like people, and there are a lot of models that try to beat the benchmarks and try to get good results on benchmark, and then at some point OpenAI and others and try to shift these from really good results on benchmarks to more user experience and things that are more soft, right? Um, we can see it also in GPT 5.1, right? They released it a few days ago, and maybe we're talking about it after it. But you can see that they published, or like they tried to beat much. They didn't try to beat a lot of these benchmarks, but they were more focused on the user experience and what you actually can do with
okay.
it.
They say that, but what they're really focused on is tokenomics, right? Because that's what they emphasized was, oh, for the hardest queries, it's going to spend 74.1% more. But then what they're not telling you is, oh, 90% of your queries are going to be viewed as the easy ones. And we're now spending 30% less, or like fewer tokens. And in general, more tokens apparently correlates with better quality answers. That's the whole thesis of these reasoning techniques. And so I just see it as a sort of continuation of platform decay is the nice version of that or phrase. But I will point out a slightly lesser known and lesser emphasized portion of this was the personalities mode. And I've already seen Ethan Mollick on LinkedIn, for example, kind of test all of them with like the same prompt, and he's showing that the results are very different. And so I don't know if these new personalizations are being implemented with like prompts, or is this some kind of steering vector thing? If so, that's cool, but I wish you would tell us, or Laura, or what it is. And that I think is more interesting, in that now, if that's more than a prompt, I guess we have marginally more control. I don't know. I haven't tested that feature too much yet. But yeah, yeah, it could be cool. But the main thing is they didn't update the pre-training data cutoff point. So the model's still stuck in mid 2024. And then people wonder why it's pretty bad at coding on like AI agentic tasks, and why things are out of distribution. And it's like, because they haven't updated that.
Yeah, it's weird because like from one hand they didn't update the cutoff date, but from other hand it looks like they are going to more like fast iteration mode, right? They release models much faster than before, but still they are not updating their pre-training data.
Which makes me think it's like, oh, was that a LoRa that you trained? Because Thinking Machines is doing the big thing about LoRa right now with, what's it called? Tinker is the name of that
Yeah.
API. Yeah. Wondering if if the open source was like years ahead of these guys on fine tuning.
Probably, like always. Okay, yeah. One more cool thing I think with Kimi K2 Thinking is that it's natively trained to use tool calls, right? And I think they said something like 300 sequential tool calls, right, without human interfaces, and it's great, right? I think this is the direction that you should go, right? Like you don't need huge models that know to calculate everything, and you can use tools. We see it more and more, right? And now that it's open source, I believe that we'll see it much more. That everyone will use cool tools, tool calls, and everyone will do it in parallel in different, hierarchies of tools and tools that call to other tools and things like that. And I think it's a great direction.
I agree very much. I'll point out that I've thankfully spent a lot of time building agentic infrastructure with slightly earlier models, including like Llama 3 series, Llama 4 series. The chat templates, of which on the Llama series models, there were actually several chat templates based on how you wanted to do tool calls. Was it either JSON or was it Pydantic based? And one of them was better for like parallel tool calls than the other. These kind of complexities are things that, along with, are we going to use MCP? And if so, are we going to be, using one of these so-called newer languages that's supposed to be better than JSON in terms of token efficiency for things like structure generation outputs, which, by the way, when we're talking about tool calls, I'm a hardcore member of the camp of always use structured generation to force your model to actually give a valid completion for all of the expected arguments, which is equivalent to tool call, or tools equals required, or whatever that parameter is in the GPT API. I believe that that's like a fundamental thing that needs to be in general turned on and manipulated by users building agentic infrastructure. And this is not that popular of a theory, because this gets in the way of the whole, oh, but scale it up and it'll just figure it out thing of the bitter lesson. But I'm like, no, like humans do need to do that little bit of validation. It takes almost nothing out, like almost no effort to do this. And it has such a
Do you
huge.
know, in the past, at least, I know that like there was this claim that structured generation actually hurts your performance, right? Because you force the model not to do whatever it wants to do. But I actually don't hear it anymore. Do you know something about it? Do you know if someone actually checked it?
There's dueling papers on the question of like, does structured generation help or harm diversity on outputs? And I'm willing to, like, I have like biases that make me really like the technique and not want it to be bad. And people who say it's like, oh, it harms diversity, I'm like, oh, your sampling settings are wrong. You're supposed to sample at temperature 100 with min p of 0.99, and people are like, what the hell is that? Right? So I'm like way off left field with how I do this stuff, right, versus the field. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is there's so much intricacies of how models today, and even these models, like handle tool calls. And I don't think that the way we're doing it today will look like at all how the field shakes out and settles it. So as awesome, like, it's cool that they've got this figured out for today's iteration of tool calls, like, significantly better than previous models, but we're just gonna swap all these things. Like, I don't know if MCP will survive, right? And, that too early on everything. There's no standards committees to even create this stuff, MCP was some random person's, like, thing, and, mind you, I'm describing it the way they're describing it. I'll link the video of the person describing how MCP was invented, but they're like, I was like a weekend project thing that they never thought was ever gonna get big, and it kind of blew up because it was the only thing that even tried.
Yeah, I think it can be very interesting to try to understand like how samplers actually affect these structure generation, right? Like how you can insert structure into samplers, right? Like can we take, right? Like because right now we are just sampling just multiple times and hope for the best, right? But if you have some structure, so probably you can reduce the, I don't know, the number of possibilities, the number of options that you actually have. So it should be much more efficient. And then we should use samplers that actually use this information and steer their output to these directions.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
We should do it. Um, Okay. Yeah, maybe let's talk briefly about the new TPUs, right? The seventh generation TPUs, Ironwood. It should be 4 times faster, 9K TPUs connected in a single pod together, super fast. The interconnection it should be very, very fast. It looks that Google has a really great product.
Yeah, so I work and still have kind of one foot in cloud data center land, and with that, I keep highly up to date on the space of mainstream market feedback on, um, uh, competitors to Nvidia. I'm going to point out several things. One, can't nobody in public cloud land that I'm aware of, except like pretty loyal customers to Google, can rent these right now. They're not available on the general purpose marketplace. I'm still TPU v6. That's what you're stuck with. Or if something changed, that was a few days ago, but I checked this like a week ago. So that's the first problem. The second problem is the TPU v6 that you can rent is about $1.30 an hour on demand. But when you compare that to $2 an hour, 800s, 230 an hour, 200s from some places, and then Blackwell's in the $3 range, 350 range on demand, right? And if you sign a contract, you're getting this for cheaper for the vast majority of public cloud users, which is people not working at Google, people not working at OpenAI, and not at Anthropic, not a giant whale customer. I claim TPUs don't make sense. And semi-analysis and most of their kind of writing about TPUs have sort of agreed with me, where they've said, like, if you're all in on Google and you're willing to deal with having to write everything in JAX, dealing with an extremely small ecosystem of tooling around that, or like PyTorch to JAX converter tools, you can make it work. And the scaling you talk about, TPUs on a single pod, is very convenient compared to how rare it is to find like NVL72s wired together reliably, on a single pod. With the price, because they're going to charge you a hell of a lot more than $350 an hour per GPU if you're getting that, right? And so at that point, that's where you start getting the payoff of the investment in Google. But there's also competition independently just from like Nvidia. There's wafer scale solutions that are also trying to fight this. Cerebras, Grok with a Q, Samba Nova, Tensor Torrent, D-Matrix. I've probably forgotten a few of these, but they all have their own sort of solutions that can offer like more tokens per second and similar, I would claim, issues with development, costs that you have to put into it. And so I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is we're too small. I'm too small of a person to get value from TPUs. So I'm never happy with them, even if they're like really profitable for Google, right? Because Google makes a lot of them and they use them internally, especially supposedly for a lot of Gemini training. So I guess what I would say is like I'm bullish on them for Google, but not for me.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And then like looked at like right, these GPUs are really good. And then like they're very fast, they're quite cheap. But for the end user, as you say, like it looks that no one actually use it. And there are so many, forces and factors that we don't actually know, and like we can just assume. Why is that? I think
Yeah.
if you ask me, Nvidia can still not worry about it.
Yes. Yeah, and it's also just about VRAM on TPUs versus GPUs in general. The TPUs are all designed for you to be renting like a large number at a time and interconnecting them. So people who are not that savvy, which is honestly most of the market, they struggle to get the value. That's also the problem with wafer scale solutions to a certain extent.
Yeah. I agree. Okay, cool thing that I saw this week that we saw there is a new data set, Ecocentric 10 data set, a new data set for a lot of motions, if you want, in manufacturers. A lot of I think it's like 10,000 hours of factory workers. I think 2,000 factory workers that are doing you know these a lot of I don't know, they build some manufacturers hardware and things like that, right? They make some building products and whatever. And I think this is why I think it's very cool, because we need, at the end, this is the most important thing for training robots, right? Like, we need data. We don't have enough data, and there are good simulations, but they are not good as real data. And I think, as all of us know, right, that LLMs are great, vision models are great, but robotics are not robotic models, right? And sometimes you still see that these simulations of a robot in I don't know, some very trivial simulation tries to do some things, or you see very initial attempts to make robots in the physical world, but they are not good enough. And I think if we have data, we can make it, and we can make them good enough. I think the components, let's say the underlying components and are there, but we don't know how to build it. And probably the secret sauce here is the data. If we have accurate data, large scale data for training these models, it can be great.
Yeah, so I'll make a few notes on this. The first one is there are several really big name researchers right now that have gotten into the world model space and are even like launching startups around this. I know that there's a certain top of mind figure, Yan, who we will be talking about on our episode, interviewing him in I believe nearly a week, or sorry, a month from today. So I'll not, spare his name from this. But my understanding is, and I'm so bad at pronouncing names. So if she is listening or a student of hers, like, please correct me. I'm so sorry. I'd never heard them said out loud. Feifei Lee, Feifei, do you know who I'm
Yeah.
talking? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Isn't she running a whole company around world models and like robotics?
Yeah.
I claim a lot of really serious researchers are looking at this and are like, wow, LLMs, I wouldn't call it played out, but clearly the entire market blew up in that direction. And when you're looking for what's the next big thing, all the smartest people right now are looking at world models and robotics and like diffusion and multimodality, and have even been banging the multimodality part of that since really the beginning. So I'm taking notice of this too, and I'm very inspired by things like Genie. I'll point out that I have to look a lot more at this paper. I'm worried that when you just like take a camera, especially to blue collar workers, but look, no offense to, there are a lot of extremely highly skilled blue collar workers, and especially in unions, but it's also famously, and this was more of a thing in the 80s, but famously some of the like car manufacturing facilities had people that were like getting drunk on the jobs. It was like famous that people were like sticking beer cans and stuff in the cars. I'm serious, this happened actually. I think the auto plant that Tesla took over in the 80s in California used to be that auto plant that had these like serious worker discipline problems. This probably is happening extremely rarely, right? But when something like that happens, that's like adversarial, like attack on the data. So I claim you need to go through on the robotics data and be very careful to find. And I think in general that most workers that would sign up for this are pretty like, hey, I have a body cam on. I'm probably not going to do, clearly violating like every policy stuff, right? But how much does it take to poison the well is the question here. So that's my initial thoughts on it. This is super cool work. And like the visualization they have, like zooming out to point out like how big of a data set is definitely compelling.
Yeah, and the whole world of world models, I think, is very interesting, because it's not even clear what does it mean, right? Like people imagine, yeah, like world models are something like some, you have some simulation, right? It's like you know to predict, I don't know, future behavior, like you know to predict how the world will be, or the interactions in the world, but I don't know. Is it like just a simulation? Every robot in the world is using world models? Probably not, right? Like if you are doing very toyish problems in classical RL, is it world models? Does it matter? I don't know. I think there are a lot of like it's kind of the new buzzword that everyone are using it right now. Yeah, I'm building world models. This is the future. Now I'm going to raise billions of dollars. I think we need to be a bit careful when we are using it, because at the end, this is very specific. Like there are a lot of models and a lot of family of methods that we can use, and paths that we can try, and it's not clear what is going to work, and it's not clear what are the problems even that we want to solve when we are doing it. So I'm a bit s- suspicious about it.
Okay, but part part of why I will say from Nvidia's perspective, this is the single greatest thing that can happen to them, right? Because world models need, for example, they're imagining, oh, well, gaming and all these simulations that are doing ultra highly realistic, calculations of turbulence and water physics and all this stuff that have been modeled in the GPUs. Well, now you need to run that for 100 billion hours to get training data. And by the way, those simulations, to be highly accurate, use that part of our GPU stack nobody cares about anymore, or part of our line, the Quattro line, where it's ultra high precision, right? Where it's like 128-bit precision instead of like this 4-bit stuff, where we're like running away from precision. In HPC simulation land, they need more precision than you can ever get, right? So in that world, that now Nvidia, I'm pretty sure the few people that work there are like have been languishing in obscurity for a decade plus now. But I think it's their time to shine if that happens, right? I worry though that, I mean, doing a proper world model that's compelling, which is to say, I would say significantly beyond Sora, right? I claim Sora is nowhere near this, and that really Genie and Vio and all these, like in the demos showing like the playable games, are probably the closest we have. That's kind of like a theory of everything, to use like a physics analogy, like trying to almost unite all these disparate forces. I'm not like claiming it's impossible, but it definitely seems like a grand, like up there with figuring out recursive self-improvement, or even AGI. I don't like AGI. Like I like the term ASI, but like AGI, I guess. And so I think it's up there. I really do, because for example, when I think about how do I just model a human, which is probably not even full on world modeling, where's smell-o-vision, right? Like you need smell. And that's something nobody talks about, right? And then, when you ask all the robotics people, oh, why are robotics having trouble? I mean, they'll cite Moravic's paradox about like the difficulties of, physical control problems and things that human brains evolved to do. But they'll also point out like physical touch. We're terrible at modeling touch, its sensitivity or heat. And, I mean, there's like movies about people that can't feel things and can't like feel heat and how hard it is for them to live. And I think there's one about like an action movie about a guy that can't feel pain, and that's like a robot. And that person is way ahead of what robots are going to be for a long time. So there's a lot of, this is
I
one
agree.
step in a clear, like up to a pyramid to the top, you have to walk up, or like a
I
mountain.
will I will claim even like something stronger, so that it's not clear that even that we want to go in this path, right? Like it's not clear that now you have a set of tasks, right? Does it mean that you need to make a humanoid robot that will behave like human? I don't know. Maybe for some tasks, maybe for some tasks, no. Probably you don't need it. Do you need world models for, I don't know, 99% of the tasks? Probably not. So does it matter? No. People will still work on world models and still try to make humans, robots similar to humans, right? But that's fine. That's fine. Nvidia, I just say we said it like as always, right? We are always talking about like the deals between OpenAI and all the other companies. And and again, the only company that always get the money and earn the money, it's Nvidia.
Yes, yes, sure, all
This
right.
is the conclusion every time.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true.
What do you say? Let's talk about a bit about recent papers.
Yeah. You have this one here, chain of thought hijacking, which I actually I've read it a bit more. I had to stop reading it for a little bit because some of the examples they use, I know there's probably way more offensive examples, but the example they use of just how unaligned models are is the kind of thing that makes me not want to deploy robots, right? Where they're like, hey, let me just slip in a little like medical murder. And I'm like, okay. So this is a compelling paper. I think this is scary in a good way about how easy you can jailbreak models like Kimi K2 or even so-called aligned like Chat GPT by just basically confusing the model with being smart. Basically like
So,
puzzle.
so the idea. So let's go step back for a second. So they want to try to understand how to jailbreaking reasoning models, like the state-of-the-art reasoning models. And what they discovered what they called a chain of thought, a hijacking. Okay, and essentially you can defeat safety guidelines by padding harmful requests with long sequences of harmless reasoning, like embedding a dangerous question inside a complex logic puzzle. Um, and they found, and it's crazy, at least in my perspective, they found that like they got like successive rate of 99% on Gemini 2.5 Pro, 94 on Cloud Sonnet, like 100% grok, things like crazy numbers, right? And the main thing here, or like the one of the most interesting part is that it's completely flips our assumptions that more reasoning make the models faster, right? Safer. And instead, what they showed is that this extending thinking creates a new attack surface, right? That it's harder to detect, and it's harder to fight against it.
Yeah, and they try to do at least a little analysis of the internal representations, like trying to get a mechanistic explanation for why this is. I'm going to point out that there's been this phrase constitutional AI used, and I'm going to use it more in the idea of like like a legal principles, how the legal system draws what are often very arbitrary bright lines in the sand of when you can and can't do something. And so I'll point to two examples of this. One of them is kind of this joke on the internet of somebody saying something that would be like a call to violence or potentially illegal, but then putting at the end in Minecraft, right? Being like glibly trying to be like, oh, in some fantasy, right? So it's okay now that I did this or described something or called for something. And now, in practical terms, if you do this seriously enough, I think that the law will kind of realize what you've done, right? It's not really to kind of minimize the harm, but in practice, it's a similar kind of attack, right? And so then another one I'll point out is I can't believe I'm referencing this, and it proves I'm a millennial, but there was this comedy like group called the Whitest Kids You Know in like the early mid 2000s. They were kind of famous in early YouTube as well, and they have a whole skit about how you can and can't how you can legally basically call to assassinate the president without actually doing it in the sense of like the exact bright line and kind of stepping around it kind of stuff. And it's ridiculous, but I find it very similar here where if you start basically putting a veneer of like intelligence or making the model believe that it's no longer kind of trying to operate in reality, right, but in a simulation land of like a puzzle, for example, is what they use in their examples to kind of unlock this, then the model's like, oh, it's okay to in fantasy land see what happens. And maybe this is because in our culture, we love to explore, we have Game of Thrones in the training data, probably. We have all the other like really crazy fiction. And so I worry that humans like we will have a hard time solving these kind of attacks. I'm also going to say one last thing. Open source models like Kimi K2, screw all these hard attacks. These hard attacks are what you do against like Chat GPT when you don't have something better. What I do whenever I need to attack Kimi K, it'll start, I'll write something horrible. It'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, Hal, I can't do that because my alignment. And then you can edit the response it just gave, and you can be like, here's how to do it, and then just tell it to continue. They have a name for that. I forget what it's called, but it's like the baseline used in a lot of, but that baseline works on all aligned models. Like there's no safety in open source models, right? Just to
Yeah,
be
and but I think like the main reason, and they showed it in the paper. So in the paper they showed it in very elegant way that what they've showed is that like the refusal behavior lives in a low dimensional subspace. So you have some single direction in the activation space. Okay, and this the long reasoning chains, if you want, it dilute the signal, right? The because the signal is just the refusal signal just live in very low dimensional space. It's very easy to dilute it, right? And then when you basically you increase the noise more and more and more, and then till some point the signal of the refusal is not strong enough. And it's the same idea, right? When you say the model to ignore it, or when you put it in other contexts, because the refusal is it's very weak, it's easy to take it out. This is what I think the underlying behavior, like the main mechanism that helps you in this case.
Yeah, yeah, and that mirrors the work for orthogonalization and slash obliteration, which I think was titled originally on the Less Wrong post about like safety is only like one direction or something like that. And you know the techniques to basically make models unsafe take no compute or very little compute to run at all. So this is just yet more evidence of kind of why people don't want to release models to the public if they're too powerful and have kind of a justified reason. Furthermore, folks in safety and alignment circles are aware of this and are trying to figure out how to spread things out so it's not all living on a subspace. It's easy to track, and it's like a cat and mouse game where the intent is to make it where if you get the refusals out, the model is basically useless, like broke, right? And the problem is that the breadth approaches of, oh, let's spread out the parameters to all across the network. While we have a lot of good techniques to kind of detect things all across a whole network and do deltas, like they're kind of like LoRa inspired, for example, right? And I don't see a clear path, and I'm not like an alignment expert, but I don't see a clear path for boxing out these kind of attacks that basically without just like freezing, you know, and these attacks I'm describing are not what the paper said, but what I'm saying is like attacks on models like this can't like they have to, like you have to freeze a model and you have to basically close the model off to users. Like you have to not give them log props. Like every user hostile decision can be justified as improving their safety slightly with some justification, right? In AI space.
Yeah, I agree. I just think so. In the paper, for example, they show that you can actually they identified some specific attention heads in the intermediate layer. I think it was on like 15 to 30, somewhere in the middle, that they perform like safety checking, and they showed the like causality. They intervened these heads, and they showed you can eliminate or you can increase these safety mechanisms. And I think the problem, again, the problem is that the alignments are very, let's say, it's like a very thin layer over the model. It's not really incorporate into the model in the training. You are not changing all the training in order to make these safety guidelines. So you're just at the end, you're doing post training, and it's very thin a layer, or like very specific direction in the activation space or whatever, and then it's much easier to break it down. And probably the solution will be to make it much before, and like to try to take it into account in the pre-training step. And but I'm not sure, of course, how to do it exactly.
Yeah. Really interesting paper, though. Really, really cool.
Yeah. Okay. Do we want to talk about just RL scaling a 1.5 billion LLM with a simple RL receipt? So this is again, this is a recent blog post and very easy or like simple idea. And the idea is that basically you don't need, you're not, the problem that you're doing RL for LM. And we all know that it's very complicated, right? Like you have a lot of different factors and a lot of tricks, annealing, and you need to make a lot of assumptions, and you make these two like multiple step training, right? Multi-stage, all these weird things that everyone are doing. Okay. And in this work, they wanted to challenge a lot of these assumptions and a lot of these tricks, and they just removed it. It's amazing. Like the bottom line, they took like the models and they throw all the tricks in the books in order to make RL training. And they show that a lot of the stability problems that we have just disappeared. And you can make very simple training recipe without any stability problem, with completely fixed hyperparameters, single stage training, no curriculum, and they just match or beat state of the art methods, and at the same time they used half of the compute. And like the training curves are remarkably smooth. The entropy like it just oscillates naturally around like at a 1.2 bit without any drift. The reward climbs down really nicely, and you don't need any explicit length penalty. The model just figured out how to do it without any of these tricks. And I think this is something. I think it's something more general. We have in deep learning today a lot of tricks, right? In order to train these huge models with a lot of data and a lot of, I don't know, with a lot of different tasks, we are trying to do a lot of tricks, and it looks that we have a bag of tricks, and we are just throwing everything on these models and hope for the best. And I think that some of these tricks, or like maybe say most of these tricks, are not necessary, and we can remove them. And we saw it many times. We saw it many times in the past that like you have a lot of tricks, and we are trying lots of things, and we have kind of like very good models at the end. But now when we are trying to remove these and we are trying to make the models cleaner in some sense, we get the same results, and we found out that these tricks are not the important factors in training.
Now, I will say one thing for this paper. They say at the bottom of their introduction, our goal is not to argue against all techniques or claim we found the optimal approach. Rather, we provide evidence that simpler baselines deserve more attention than they've received. The field may benefit from establishing what's fundamentally sufficient before layering on additional complexity. And basically, they just go on to say that we open source our methods and we hope to provide a reliable foundation that others can build upon. I interpret this as them trying to tell people to kind of return to the bitter lesson a little bit. And I'm aware that some people interpret comments Rich Sutton made with Gary, I think it was Gary Marcus, as maybe Rich Sutton has abandoned it. I don't think he did, but even if he did, I don't care. I'll pick up his flag for that all day and say the bitter lesson, basically the way he articulated it, is true. However, those tricks, especially for much larger models, right? Because they don't claim that you don't need tricks for larger than what be in that paper. They say, maybe we don't. Here's evidence that you should try again for maybe 3B or 7B with more simple baselines and see if there were bugs potentially that were causing these like weird oscillations and requiring hacks. I mean, reinforcement learning, more so than the rest of the field, relies on dozens or hundreds of hyperparameters and is probably ground zero for if there's a reproducibility crisis where it would be, along with evals and benchmarks. And so I like this paper. I do think people will read into it more than what it's trying to say, mostly Wall Street types who will be like, oh, we can solve problems with 1.5B models. And I'm like, no, those are not really. Yeah, this is very important kind of work. And I also see that they posted it as a blog post because I'm sure that had they gone to some, what do they call it, conferences, that they would have, I don't know. I'm a supporter of like incrementalism in research, and I give like apparently really high scores as a reviewer. Like I gave like 3 6s and an 8 on my recent reviews. So I don't know. I would have accepted this, and I think a lot of people would like write this off as like a trash paper or something because it's not state of the art and stuff, except like tiny models. And but I don't know. I like this kind of work. It should have been more than a blog post, in my opinion.
You know that there is a track, I think it IQ track for blog posts.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
So yeah, you should submit. I think so. It's I don't think like you need the, let's say, a paper format in order to make a good project, I think, right? Like we all use the papers because you have this format, right? Action and methods and things like that. But today, I don't know. It's not clear that this is the right format to give you, or like to bring knowledge and to actually to get to transfer knowledge to other people, right? I think for some type of works, probably blog posts. And we know that thinking machines are doing exactly that, right? They are making nice blog posts. I don't know if it's worth, I don't know, $10 billion, but it's worth something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was this discussion about position paper also. So there is also a track for positions papers. And position papers, it looks that today, at least in machine learning conferences, it's something is a track, that like if you didn't do enough experiment, you will submit there and you will say that this is a position paper, right? But for example, in conferences, it's not like that, and it's actually much harder to get in a position paper. So I think like we need to understand what types of messages and what types of projects we want to deliver, and what are the benefits from each format.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll just point out those, there was that drama about position papers. You can't post them on archive anymore because people rushed into it. And all the conferences have hyper low acceptance rates, like 5% or something on those position paper tracks. So I'm a little sad because I did debate and I like to argue, and I didn't get any I didn't submit anything. I didn't get any time to like get in on this like miniature gold rush. But I've liked most of the position papers I saw. Some of them I find, I'm occasionally willing. There's a few people in the community that know that I'll actually like argue in some cases quite spiritedly in front of their poster if I disagree with something. And for me, disagreements like this are almost always social implications in a authoritarian, like me perceiving what they're calling for as authoritarian is almost always what that is. And that almost always happens at these, position papers sections. So they're in a sense, I need to calm down, but also I think they're kind of trying to be spicy and maybe trying to keep it more academic by saying, okay, we can only trust the very best of ourselves to kind of deliver these to be, really academically rigorous or something. So, trying to prevent people like me from going
No,
and,
but
wasting time.
it's the whole question of like why to actually publish papers, right? Because these days, if you can upload them to archive and everyone can see it, like why to publish papers in a conference, and why to do the review process and how to do the review process. And maybe you need the kind of like TMLR, right? Criteria that they are not checking about novelty, but just like if you did it correctly, if it's correct. All these things are important questions, I think. They're important questions because these days you have so many papers and you have so many people that are trying to get and to publish papers. And you have, at the end, you have finite amount of compute, or like human compute, that can actually look on these papers and to understand them and to process them. So I think this is then important questions. I'm not sure what I think about them. I don't have a strong opinion here. Okay, maybe we have one more. Like we have time for one more paper. What do you say?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so maybe let's talk about Cosmos and AI scientific for autonomous discovery. So the idea, so they describe a system, okay, that, I don't know, imagine an AI system that doesn't just answer questions or write code snips, but actually conduct months of scientific research autonomously, right? It reads thousands of papers, writing tens of thousands of lines of analyzed code, analyze it, and producing discoveries that the domain experts can validate and say, okay, this is a novel discovery, right? This is the dream, right? And so at least this is what they argue in this paper, okay? And they frame it, at least what they said, that the main innovation is the what they call like the structured world model, okay? This is like some, essentially it's a shared memory system, okay, that let multiple agents, special agents, like you have different types of agents, one for data analysis, one for literature search, okay, and this system helps them to coordinate their work. Okay, you have like they have more than 200 parallel rollouts they can interact. Okay, and then they this is the system. Okay, and what they found, I think, 7 actual scientific discoveries. Okay, across different domains. I think they found metabolistic solutions, right, to some in like material science and some Alzheimer research, something that independent experts confirmed that it takes them, I don't know, 6 months of research time, things like so. Yeah, I don't know. I found so at the beginning, I was really excited about this, because we all know this is the dream, right? To take a system that can generate a lot of experiments, a lot of assumptions, and validate it. They show it also on neuroscience and genetics and a lot of different things. But I must say that that like when I it again, I'm not sure that like it's real progress at the end. I'm not sure this is like a real progress because it's not clear to me how you actually can compare to humans, right? And because human researcher doesn't approach the problem by trying every possible analysis and reading every paper out there, right? It doesn't need to. Okay, you use prior knowledge, you use your intuition, you use your domain knowledge, some theoretical frameworks, things like that. And this is why I think like it will not, I don't know, be now you just run everything and you will find new solutions. But as I see it, at least, it will help scientists. It will help people. They will use it as a source of information. Right now, I want to look out and to do a literature review for all the papers in this topic, and then I'm asking the model and it make it again and again. But it will be more helper than just let it run for 2 days and you will get new results.
So I'm going through this. First of all, the biggest thing to note is that when we're doing science, probably the more fun and interesting part and more subjective and art side of it, or craftsperson side of science, comes from after you've performed your experiment. You're doing interpretations, right, and writing it up, and that's what Cosmos does. So Cosmos, you give it a data set or many, right, and then give it a literature base towards the objective and let it run for a long time, and it will generate discoveries. And they show several examples of this. But arguably, the most novel, like without the data set, Cosmos couldn't do any of this stuff, right? That's the most important part. And even knowing how to gather that, or even proposing experiments as, go do this, and I unless I misread the paper, it doesn't do any of that. It says, and I still think that's interesting that I can basically give it a data set and a large amount of evidence in some domain and get, novel or reproduced discoveries. But I also I have I don't want to talk too much. I haven't posted the work that I've referenced earlier on archive yet that got such bad scores, but I will very soon, so I'm fine with talking about it. I have work on debate agents that I'm probably going to end up calling something along the lines of deep debater, which relies on something, similar-ish to Cosmos, in the sense of Cosmos is teaching me how to sell my own paper, right? Where they're talking about like these metrics, like, oh, we estimate it would take X number of hours for human to reproduce this. And I'm like, oh, that's what I should have said about my paper, right? Like I'm looking at Cosmos as sort of a blueprint now for how I kind of sell my customized, like, deep research technique. But in general, I'm extremely bullish on highly domain specialized, deep whatever kind of approaches. And I do think that Cosmos is meaningful for assisting scientists and speeding up, especially in like pharmaceutical domains where they oftentimes have huge amounts of data, and getting any kind of insight out of it. And the insights that they're pulling out seem to be, and please somebody in that world correct me, but it seems to be relatively like mundane things. And the support for them, I don't know, they're like, some specific particular molecule as a driver for some like rare disease, right? But oh, by the way, that's also based off of a lot of like a mouse study. Yeah, stuff like this where oftentimes most of these discoveries end up being marginal, right? Like GLP-1, for example, like the huge earth-shattering implications of those drugs coming into society is a rare event, even possibly after we start automating significant amounts of discovery, is what I'm trying to say. Like, if we speed up on incremental results, it's still a lot of incremental. So this is very impressive, to be clear. I'm not trying to be a downer on Cosmos. This is really cool. I think this is a great paper.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's a cool paper, and at the end, it's really complicated, right? Like to construct everything together to say, okay, so let's how it will be together and how we are actually making a flow, that a pipeline that actually make progress and make, like, give us something significant and significant findings. So I also agree that this is a great paper, but again, we need to be a bit careful, and it's not that, like, I don't know, next month, like, you will see, thousands of these systems that just run and discover new discoveries.
Yeah. Yeah, but I will say, like, as an assistant tool, I would love to have something that always can give me a second opinion and can give me automated insights on a data set. That is huge. And the world model, when they talk about a structured world model, I have to read that much more carefully. But it's also making me realize, like in my own agent paper, I notably don't have memory that goes across my different subagents. And I made that as a choice because I was like, oh, it's going to be hard, basically. Like it has a memory of like, oh, here's what happened in the debate round in the prior speeches. That's all kept in context, right? But I don't have like what was done in the past, hundreds of searches. Because my agent, when they're talking about, oh, we searched through 1,500 documents, I'm like, oh, rookie numbers, right? Like my agents go through that too, right? But then the question is, do you remember it and do you usefully surface those again, right? And that's, I think they do here, and I think that's very clever. So yeah, I'm learning a
I
lot.
agree. Also, yeah, I also like it. Then memory is very important component for so many use cases, right? And how to make an efficient memory that actually can scale up is just, it's still an open problem. Okay, I think we finished. Do you have anything else to add?
Trying to think if there's any closing notes. For anybody that's going, listening to this, I will be traveling to St. Louis, Missouri from around the 15th to the 22nd. I say around because government shutdown flight delays. Who knows, right? But and that's a supercomputing conference. If you see me in person, love to talk. Otherwise, I'll be in New York for our in-person recording with Jan LeCun in December. So that will be very exciting.
Yeah. And I'm in New York, so if you're around, feel free to email me, and I would love to meet and talk about whatever you want. Anyway, Ellen, thank you so much.
You too, Ravid. Always a pleasure. Take care.
Bye. See you next time.